Has later ever not sounded responsible? No, right? It feels considered, thought through, like you're being practical instead of impulsive, like you're making the mature choice. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes later really is the better choice. But sometimes later is just a cleaner way of delaying something you already know you want to do. In the last episode, I talked about redoing my daughter's room, something I kept pushing off until one small moment finally moved me. What stayed with me afterward wasn't just her reaction, which was moving in itself, but really, it was how easy it had been to keep delaying doing it while sounding completely reasonable. That kept replaying in my head, and it irked me. Not because I think every delay is wrong, and not because every act of love has to happen immediately, but because I started noticing how easily hesitation can be dressed up as wisdom. How easy it is to say, not right now, let's wait, maybe later, let me think about it, let's revisit this. And again, sometimes those are real and valid reasons, but sometimes they are not the real reason. Sometimes they're just the version of the truth that feels easier to say out loud because the truth underneath it might be, I don't want to spend the money right now. I don't feel fully settled about this yet. I want a more sound justification to do this. I'm uncomfortable doing something because it doesn't look practical on paper. I'm not sure it'll be received the way I hope it will, or whatever other stipulation I place in order to do the thing. And they are not one and the same. At that point, it's not really about the right timing anymore or the right conditions. It's an uncomfortable truth. It's discomfort, hesitation, resistance. And resistance is hard to admit, and even harder when you see yourself as thoughtful, responsible, or grounded. So instead of calling it hesitation, we call it discernment. Instead of saying, I'm resisting this, we say, it just doesn't make sense right now. All to soften the blow to ourselves. And that's the part I keep circling back to. Because later can sound so reasonable that you stop questioning it. Later sounds patient, disciplined, and very adult. But later can also become a hiding place, a place where you put things you don't fully want to say no to, but you don't feel quite ready to say yes to either. And if you leave enough things there, you start to confuse delay with wisdom. And I think that happens way more than we realize with our kids, with people we love, conversations, apologies, effort, generosity, with saying the thing and making the gesture, with acting while the feeling is still alive. We delay it until it feels more defendable, more earned, more explainable, less vulnerable. And by the time it gets through all of that, sometimes the moment is gone. It has passed you by. That's the thing about later. Later does not usually announce what it's taking with it. It just keeps moving the moment a little further away until what once felt so readily available starts to feel so distant that it seems less attainable. And sometimes that's fine, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes later costs more than the discomfort of simply doing the thing. And I think that's part of what unsettled me the most. not just because I had delayed something, but because how polished the delay sounded, how easy it was to make hesitation sound mature, how easy it was to hand out conditions when what I was really doing was buying time for when I felt it was earned. And I think that landed so hard for me because I've lived the cost of that before. Back in Making Peace with Regret, I talked about my father. And part of what made that story so painful was realizing how often we believe there will be more time to visit, more time to say the thing, more time to do whatever it is we keep telling ourselves we're going to do later, until one day later is gone. And that's part of why this question of hesitation resonates with me, because sometimes delay is harmless, and sometimes it becomes the space where meaningful things never happen. That's why I keep coming back to this, because when later is real, that's one thing. But when later is just hesitation cloaked in responsible excuses, it can cost more than we realize. And I think that's where this gets painfully honest for me. Sometimes later is not about timing. Sometimes it's about permission. Permission to spend, to act, to be generous. Permission to do something meaningful before every practical question has been fully answered. And if you're someone who prides yourself on being responsible, that can be really uncomfortable because you don't want to be careless. You don't want to be impulsive. You don't want to make choices just because you feel something strongly. So you slow it down. You make a plan. You create a process. You add conditions. You wait for a sound reason. And most times that is the right move, but not always. Sometimes the clearer reason never comes. Sometimes all that's left is a moment that needed less editing and more courage. Enough courage to say, I don't have every part of this tied up neatly, but I know I want to move on it. And that should count for something, shouldn't it? I think a lot of us have something in our lives right now sitting in that later pile. Something we're not saying no to, but not saying yes to either. A conversation, a gift, a visit, a forgiveness, a change, a beginning. Something that has made sense to postpone. I know I did that with my daughter's room, with visiting my father. And those are just the ones this year so far. And maybe we shouldn't be convincing ourselves that we have a solid reason to wait. Maybe we should be asking, is waiting actually helping here? Or is it just helping me avoid the discomfort of deciding to act on it? Because not every hesitation is wisdom, and not every delay is discernment. Sometimes it's just resistance speaking in a nurturing voice. Listen, life gives us enough real reasons things cannot and do not happen, enough actual limitations, enough genuine constraints, enough moments that truly are out of our reach. I know that personally. My father passed on, and now there is no later for us to fall into. He nor I can get that back. So when something can happen, when something meaningful is possible, when the only real barrier is that it does not feel logical enough yet, it is worth asking whether practicality is guiding you or just covering for your discomfort. This is not a call to be reckless. It's a call to be honest, because honest sounds different. Honest says, I'm hesitant. I'm resisting this. I keep saying later, but I'm not sure later is actually true. I may be calling this wisdom because this feels better than calling it fear. And sometimes naming it that way is what finally shakes it loose. Sometimes it only takes one small interruption to break the rhythm of delay. Not a perfect plan, not a clear certainty, just one honest movement that stops the stall. So maybe sit with this one for a second. Where in your life does later sound responsible? And where might it actually be hesitation trying to pass as wisdom? Because those two things are not always the same. And sometimes it's the difference between a life you're actively living and one you are forever preparing yourself to enter. Before we close, if Caffeine and Clarity has been a place for you to slow down long enough to notice what's actually underneath things, you're always welcome to stay connected. You can listen on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Share this episode with someone who might need it, or support the show by buying me a coffee or picking up something from the shop. But more than anything, I am so incredibly thankful that you're here. And next time, I want to close out this mini series by talking about what happens when hesitation stops sounding temporary and starts becoming a way of life. Here's your sip of the day. Later is not always wisdom. Sometimes it's hesitation cloaked as responsibility. This is Caffeine and Clarity.